The ship materialized in Earth's orbit without warning, its hull absorbing light rather than reflecting it, making it appear as a wound in the fabric of space itself. Inside the command chamber, Xyrith stood motionless before the viewing screen, her four eyes fixed on the blue-green world rotating below. Her species, the Vexnari, had evolved as apex predators on a world of eternal twilight, and her physiology reflected that heritage. Tall and angular, with skin that shifted between deep violet and obsidian black depending on her emotional state. She possessed retractable feeding appendages that could pierce armor and drain the bioelectric energy that sustained most carbon-based life forms. Humans would have called her a vampire, though the comparison would have been crude and incomplete. She had traveled for 17 standard cycles to reach this insignificant world on the galactic rim. 17 cycles since she had discovered the truth about what happened to her nestmate, Kythera. 17 cycles of following cold trails and dead ends across dozens of worlds until finally, mercifully, she had found the name and location of the one responsible. A human. A male human serving in what their species called the Terran Exploration Corps. The records she had obtained, purchased at great cost from information brokers in the Andromeda Reach, identified him as Captain Marcus Webb, stationed at a remote research facility somewhere in the northern territories of Earth's largest continent. Xyrith's feeding appendages twitched involuntarily beneath her jaw as she thought about Marcus Webb. The data had been sparse, but damning. He had been present on Vexnari during the incident 20 cycles ago, part of humanity's first official diplomatic mission to her homeworld. The mission that had ended in catastrophe. The mission during which Kythera, her beloved nestmate, her companion since larval emergence, had died under mysterious circumstances that the Terran authorities had classified as an unfortunate accident. But Xyrith knew better. She had seen the classified reports, had read between the carefully worded lies. Kythera's death had not been an accident. It had been murder. The ship's navigation system chimed softly, indicating that atmospheric entry calculations were complete. Xyrith dismissed the screen with a gesture and moved toward the armament chamber. Her ship was small by Vexnari standards, designed for a single operator and built for stealth rather than combat. But it carried enough weaponry to level a small settlement if necessary. She did not intend to level anything, however. Her vengeance required something more personal than orbital bombardment. She needed to look Marcus Webb in the eyes when she drained him, needed to feel his life force flowing into her, needed to hear him scream as Kythera must have screamed. The descent through Earth's atmosphere was smooth and undetected. Humanity had developed impressive technology since first reaching the stars a century ago, but their detection grids still had blind spots that a skilled pilot could exploit. Xyrith guided her vessel through a gap in the orbital sensor network and dove toward the planet's surface, her ship's stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible to both electronic and visual detection. She had studied Earth extensively during her journey, learning everything she could about its geography, climate zones, political divisions, and cultural peculiarities. Humans were a strange species, simultaneously brilliant and barbaric, capable of breathtaking acts of compassion and horrifying acts of cruelty. They had achieved interstellar travel through a combination of determination and reckless innovation that most other species found baffling. Where others had spent millennia developing safe, reliable methods of faster-than-light travel, humans had simply strapped themselves to prototype engines and hoped for the best. The research facility where Marcus Webb was stationed appeared on her scanners as she descended through the cloud layer. It was located in a region humans called Alaska, a vast territory of mountains, forests, and frozen tundra in the planet's northern hemisphere. The facility itself was modest, a cluster of prefabricated buildings arranged around a central dome, surrounded by a perimeter fence that hummed with low-level electrical current. Xyrith's instruments identified it as a xenobiology research station, one of dozens scattered across Earth where scientists studied samples and data collected from humanity's exploration of the galaxy. She set her ship down in a clearing 5 kilometers from the facility, engaging full stealth protocols as the landing struts kissed the snow-covered ground. The cold hit her immediately when she opened the airlock. Her homeworld of Vexnari was a warm place, heated by a red dwarf star that bathed the planet in constant dim light. Earth's Arctic regions were shockingly frigid by comparison, the temperature well below freezing according to her suit's sensors. Xyrith activated her environmental suit's heating elements and stepped out onto the snow. The crunch of ice beneath her boots was the only sound in the silent wilderness. Above her, the sky was a tapestry of stars, brighter and more numerous than anything she had seen on dozens of other worlds. Humanity's sun was a yellow dwarf, more energetic than her own star, and the night sky reflected that abundance of cosmic neighbors. She began walking toward the facility, her long legs eating up the distance with steady, purposeful strides. Her four eyes scanned the terrain constantly, alert for any sign of danger. Earth was home to numerous predator species, though none that posed a significant threat to a fully grown Vexnari. Still, caution was wisdom. The forest around her was composed of tall conifers, their branches heavy with snow. Small creatures scurried in the underbrush, their bioelectric signatures weak but detectable. She ignored them. Her prey was ahead. As she drew closer to the facility, Xyrith began detecting the stronger bioelectric signatures of humans. Her feeding sense, a specialized organ cluster at the base of her skull, painted a mental map of life forms within the compound. She counted 17 distinct signatures, most clustered in what appeared to be a residential section. One signature, stronger and more refined than the others, was located in a building at the facility's edge. According to her intelligence, that would be the medical center. Her feeding sense analyzed the signature's characteristics, measuring its resonance patterns and energy density. It was consistent with a human male in his late 30s, physically fit, with above-average neural activity. Captain Marcus Webb. Xyrith felt her hunting instincts surge. Her skin darkened to pure black, an involuntary response to the proximity of prey. Her feeding appendages began to extend from their sheaths beneath her jaw, 3 segmented tendrils tipped with hollow, needle-sharp points. In her species' ancient past, before they had evolved intelligence and civilization, Vexnari had hunted in the twilight forests of their homeworld, using these appendages to paralyze prey with neurotoxins before draining their bioelectric essence. Modern Vexnari had long since abandoned such primitive hunting, relying instead on synthetic energy supplements and, when necessary, voluntary donations from other species. But the instincts remained, hardwired into their nervous systems, waiting for moments like this. She circled the facility, analyzing its defenses. The perimeter fence was a joke, designed more to keep local wildlife out than to stop a determined intruder. The security systems were similarly inadequate, relying on simple motion sensors and cameras that her suit's electronic countermeasures could easily fool. Humanity's complacency on its own homeworld was working in her favor. They had no reason to expect an alien assassin to infiltrate a remote research station. Why would they? Earth was supposed to be safe, protected by treaties and conventions that governed interactions between spacefaring species. But Xyrith cared nothing for treaties. Kithara's death demanded blood for blood, and she would have it regardless of the consequences. She chose her entry point carefully, a service entrance on the facility's eastern side that appeared to be used primarily for equipment deliveries. The door was locked, but her suit's universal interface made short work of the simple electronic lock. She slipped inside, moving through darkened corridors with predatory grace. Her species had evolved to hunt in low light, and her 4 eyes could perceive a broader spectrum than human vision, from deep infrared to near ultraviolet. To her enhanced senses, the facility's interior was as bright as day. The medical center was located in Building 6, according to the facility map she had downloaded from publicly available records. Xyrith made her way there methodically, avoiding the few night shift workers still awake at this late hour. Twice she passed within meters of humans, pressing herself into shadowed alcoves as they walked by, completely unaware of her presence. Their bioelectric signatures were loud to her feeding sense, each one a unique symphony of neural patterns and metabolic processes. She could have fed on any of them, could have drained them in seconds, and left nothing but desiccated husks. The temptation was there, a primal urge that whispered in the back of her mind. But she resisted. Her vengeance was not with them. The medical center was dark when she reached it, its occupants apparently asleep. Xyrith paused outside, extending her feeding sense to its maximum range. She detected 5 bioelectric signatures inside. 4 were weak and irregular, consistent with humans in medically induced states. The 5th was the strong, refined signature she had identified as Marcus Webb. But something was wrong. The signature was not located in the staff quarters as she had expected. Instead, it was in the patient ward, and its patterns were distorted, exhibiting the kind of degradation associated with severe injury or illness. Xyrith felt a flicker of concern, quickly suppressed. If Marcus Webb was ill or injured, that would complicate her vengeance, but not prevent it. She would drain him regardless of his condition. Perhaps it would even be fitting if he was suffering, a small taste of what Kithara must have endured. She accessed the medical center's door, bypassing its security with practiced ease, and slipped inside. The interior smelled of antiseptics and synthetic polymers, scents that were universal to medical facilities across the galaxy. Xyrith moved through the reception area and into the patient ward, following the bioelectric signature like a beacon. The ward consisted of 6 private rooms arranged along a central corridor. Marcus Webb's signature emanated from room 4. She approached the door, her feeding appendages fully extended now, dripping with neurotoxin in anticipation of the kill. Her hearts, 3 of them beating in syncopated rhythm, pounded with the excitement of imminent vengeance. She opened the door. The room beyond was dimly lit by monitoring equipment that surrounded a single occupied bed. The figure lying in that bed was human, male, with the physical characteristics matching Marcus Webb's profile. But Xyrith froze as she took in the full scope of what she was seeing. The human was not simply ill or recovering from injury. He was catastrophically damaged, his body a testament to suffering that made her feeding appendages retract involuntarily in shock. Marcus Webb's left arm was missing, amputated at the shoulder. His right leg ended at the knee, the stump covered by white medical wrapping. But those visible injuries were nothing compared to what her feeding sense revealed about his internal condition. His bioelectric signature, which should have been strong and vibrant in a healthy human, was fractured and weak, sustained only by the medical equipment surrounding him. She detected massive scarring in his lungs, signs of neural damage throughout his central nervous system, and the telltale resonance patterns of foreign biological material integrated into his tissues, the kind of contamination that resulted from exposure to certain types of exotic radiation or toxic substances. Xyrith stood in the doorway, paralyzed by confusion. This was not the vicious killer she had imagined during her 17-cycle journey. This was a broken shell, more corpse than man, kept alive by machines and medical intervention. What had happened to him? How had the murderer of her nestmate ended up like this? As if sensing her presence, Marcus Webb's eyes opened. They were gray, the color of Earth's winter storms, and they fixed on her with surprising clarity despite his condition. He did not seem surprised to see a Vexnari standing in his doorway. His lips moved, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper, dry and weak. "Took you long enough," he said. Xyrith's confusion deepened into something approaching alarm. "You knew I was coming?" "Been expecting one of you for years now," Marcus Webb replied. His eyes moved to her retracted feeding appendages. "Vexnari. Should have guessed. Kithara was Vexnari. You must be a nestmate or clan member. Come to finish the job she started, or to avenge her death." He coughed, a wet, painful sound. "Either way, I won't stop you." "Can't really. Everything below my neck barely works anymore. You'll be doing me a favor." Xyrith felt her carefully constructed narrative of vengeance crumbling. Kithara's death was no accident. The official reports claimed equipment malfunction, but I found evidence of a cover-up. Evidence that pointed to you. Marcus Webb's expression, what little she could see of it past the medical equipment, might have been a smile. It was not a happy expression. Equipment malfunction. That's what they went with. Creative. Better than the truth, I suppose. He took a labored breath. "What did your evidence say happened?" "The classified reports indicated that Kithara died of bioelectric drain," Xyrith said slowly, her hunting instincts still active but increasingly confused by this situation. A feeding kill, which should have been impossible since Vexnari had stopped taking unwilling prey centuries ago. The only human present when it happened was you. The logical conclusion was murder, covered up by Terran authorities to avoid an interstellar incident. Logical, Marcus agreed, but wrong. Or rather, right but backwards. Kythera did die of bioelectric drain. But she wasn't the victim. She was the killer. Or tried to be, anyway. Xyrith felt her skin flash through several colors in rapid succession, betraying her emotional turmoil. That is impossible. Kythera was a scientist, a xenobiologist specializing in cross-species medical applications. She had no history of violence. She would never. She was also desperate, Marcus interrupted, his voice gaining a trace of strength. Desperate to save her research partner. Me. He paused for another labored breath. We were on Vexen studying a fungal infection that affected both our species. Fascinating organism, really. Spreads through spores, infiltrates the nervous system, eventually causes total systemic failure. Kythera and I had been documenting cases in a remote settlement when I got careless. Breathed in a concentrated dose of spores while collecting samples. By the time we realized what happened, I was already symptomatic. Xyrith felt herself sinking into a chair beside the door, her legs suddenly uncertain. The fungal infection you describe, we call it gray death. There is no cure. The mortality rate is nearly 100%. Was 100%, Marcus corrected. Kythera theorized that a massive bioelectric shock might be able to burn the infection out of the nervous system before it fully established itself. The theory was sound, but there was no equipment available in the settlement capable of generating the required charge. So she decided to use herself as the power source. Vexnari can control the rate at which they drain bioelectric energy. She theorized that if she drained me almost to the point of death and then used her own bioelectric reserves to shock my system, it might work. But that would require her to drain herself dangerously low, Xyrith said, horror dawning in her understanding. Vexnari can die from energy depletion. Our bodies need a minimum charge to sustain autonomic functions. She knew the risks, Marcus said. His eyes closed briefly, and Xyrith thought he might have lost consciousness, but then they opened again. She did it anyway. Drained me down to almost nothing, then fed her own energy back into my system in a massive discharge. It worked. The bioelectric shock killed the fungal infection. Saved my life. But she had depleted herself too much. By the time she finished, her own charge was below critical levels. She collapsed. I was unconscious, unable to help her. By the time the emergency team arrived, she was dead. The room fell silent except for the beeping of medical monitors. Xyrith sat motionless, processing what she had been told. Her entire worldview, the foundation upon which she had built 17 cycles of hate and determination, was crumbling. The cover-up was to protect me, Marcus finished, and to protect relations between our species. If the truth had come out, that a human researcher had been saved at the cost of a Vexnari life, it would have caused diplomatic chaos. Questions would have been asked about whether I pressured her, whether the Terran government approved human-first policies, whether the treatment violated a dozen interspecies medical ethics protocols. The truth is, Kythera made her choice freely, and I would have stopped her if I'd been conscious enough to understand what she was planning. But nobody would have believed that. So my superiors classified the whole incident, listed it as an equipment malfunction, and transferred me back to Earth with orders never to speak of it. And your injuries? Xyrith asked quietly, gesturing at his ruined body. Marcus Webb's expression turned bitter. Turns out Kythera's theory had one flaw. The bioelectric shock did kill the infection, but it also caused massive neural damage. The kind that doesn't heal right, that leaves you with chronic pain and progressive muscle degeneration. I've been declining for 20 cycles now. Lost the arm first, about 10 cycles ago, when the nerves died completely and gangrene set in. The leg went 5 cycles after that. The rest of me is following slowly. Doctors give me maybe another 2 cycles before complete systemic failure. I've been living in this medical center for the past 3 cycles, too weak to be anywhere else, waiting for the end. Xyrith felt something crack inside her chest, a sensation she had not experienced since Kythera's death. It took her a moment to identify it as grief, but not grief for loss. Grief for waste. Grief for the 17 cycles she had spent hating a man who had already paid a price higher than anything she could have inflicted. She saved you only for you to die slowly anyway. She bought me 20 cycles I wouldn't have had otherwise, Marcus said. 20 cycles to finish our research. The work we did, the data we collected about gray death, it led to a treatment. Not a cure, but a preventive measure. A vaccine that stops the spores from establishing themselves in the nervous system. It's been distributed across a dozen worlds now. Saved thousands of lives. Vexnari lives, human lives, and others. That was Kithara's legacy. That was worth her sacrifice. No, Xyrith said, her voice breaking. No life is worth. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Because the truth was, thousands of lives were worth more than one. The calculus was brutal but undeniable. Kithara had saved Marcus Webb knowing he would finish their work. She had sacrificed herself not for one human, but for the thousands her research would ultimately protect. It was logical. It was noble. It was exactly the kind of thing Kithara would have done. Xyrith had come here expecting a monster and found a tragedy instead. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked. Why accept the cover-up? Why let people like me think the worst? Marcus Webb's eyes met hers, and in them she saw a depth of pain that had nothing to do with his physical condition. Because telling the truth would have made her sacrifice meaningless. The diplomatic fallout would have destroyed the research project, prevented the vaccine from being distributed, turned her death into a political weapon instead of a gift. I couldn't let that happen. So I kept quiet, took my transfer to Earth, and lived with the consequences. Including knowing that someday, someone like you would figure out enough of the truth to come looking for revenge. And you would have let me kill you. I've been dying for 20 cycles, Marcus said. Having someone speed up the process didn't seem like much of a sacrifice compared to what Kithara did. At least if you killed me, maybe you'd get closure. Maybe one person would feel better about the whole damn mess. Xyrith stood abruptly, her skin cycling through rapid color changes that would have been embarrassing if she had cared about maintaining composure. But she was beyond composure now, beyond the carefully controlled anger that had sustained her for 17 cycles. I traveled across the galaxy to kill you. I planned it for years. I imagined it in detail. I know, Marcus said. And I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing. If it helps, you can still do it. I told you, I won't stop you. At this point, death would be a mercy. No, Xyrith said firmly. No, I will not give you mercy. You do not deserve mercy. For the first time since she had entered the room, Marcus Webb looked surprised. Then, what? You deserve to live, Xyrith interrupted. You deserve to live because Kithara gave her life to save yours. You deserve to live because thousands of people are alive because of the work you finished together. You deserve to live because dying now would make her sacrifice meaningless. She moved closer to the bed, her feeding sense analyzing his deteriorating bioelectric signature with new purpose. You said your condition is caused by neural damage from the bioelectric shock. Progressive and irreversible, Marcus confirmed. Multiple specialists have examined me. The damage is too extensive and too integrated into my nervous system to repair. Every treatment they've tried has failed. Human specialists, Xyrith said, using human medical technology and human understanding of bioelectric systems. But I am Vexnari. We are beings of bioelectric energy. We understand it in ways your species is only beginning to grasp. She extended one feeding appendage, bringing it close to Marcus's shoulder. With your permission, I would like to examine you properly. Not with instruments, but with my feeding sense. It is possible, just barely possible, that I might be able to help where your doctors could not. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Why would you help me? 10 minutes ago, you wanted me dead. 10 minutes ago, I thought you were a murderer, Xyrith replied. Now I know you are the legacy Kithara left behind. The continuation of work she died to complete. If I can keep that legacy alive, then perhaps her death meant something beyond just research data and vaccines. Perhaps it meant that enemies can become allies. That vengeance can become salvation. That the universe can surprise us with grace instead of confirming our worst assumptions. She waited, her feeding appendage hovering near his skin, while Marcus Webb made his decision. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Do it, he said. If there's any chance at all, I'll take it. I owe Kithara that much. I owe her everything. Xyrith placed her feeding appendage against his shoulder, and, for the first time since entering the room, allowed herself to fully engage her feeding sense. The bioelectric signature she had analyzed from a distance became immediate and intimate, revealing depths of damage she had not imagined possible. Marcus Webb's nervous system was a catastrophe, shot through with dead zones and misfiring connections, sustained only by the artificial signals provided by his medical equipment. But underneath the damage, she detected something else. Something that made her 3 hearts skip beats simultaneously. There were traces of Kythera in him. Subtle patterns in his bioelectric field that matched her nestmate's unique signature. When Kythera had fed her own energy into Marcus to deliver that saving shock, she had left part of herself behind, imprinted into his nervous system like a ghost. And those imprints, incredibly, were still active, still trying to maintain homeostasis in a body that had long since passed the point of natural healing. "Kythera," Xyrith whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You never left him. You are still here, still fighting to keep him alive." "What?" Marcus asked, but Xyrith barely heard him. She was already planning, her mind racing through possibilities. If Kythera's bioelectric imprint was still present, still active, then perhaps it could be strengthened. Perhaps it could be used as a template to guide healing, to rebuild what had been destroyed. It would require enormous energy, more than Xyrith possessed in her own reserves. It would require precision beyond anything she had attempted before. And it would require something else, something that made her feeding appendages tremble with a mixture of fear and determination. It would require her to give freely what her species had once taken by force. It would require her to become not a predator, but a healer. "I need to consult my ship's medical database," Xyrith said, withdrawing her feeding appendage. "And I need to speak with your physicians. What I am considering has never been attempted before. It may not work. It may even make things worse. But if you are willing to try, if you are willing to trust me, then I believe there may be a way to repair what Kythera's sacrifice damaged." Marcus Webb looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and in them she saw hope kindling for the first time in cycles. "I trust you," he said simply. "Kythera did. That's enough for me." Xyrith felt her skin shift to a warm violet, the color of determination and purpose among her people. She had come to Earth seeking vengeance, and found something far more valuable instead. She had found a chance at redemption, not just for herself, but for the hate that had poisoned her for 17 cycles. She had found a way to honor Kythera's sacrifice that did not involve adding more death to the ledger. She had found a reason to heal instead of harm. As she left the medical center to retrieve equipment from her ship, Xyrith looked up at Earth's night sky and whispered a prayer to the ancestors, thanking them for guiding her to this moment, for showing her that sometimes the greatest vengeance is not violence, but its opposite, that sometimes the hunter must become the protector, that sometimes the story we tell ourselves about our pain is wrong, and the universe is kinder than we dare to believe. Kythera had died saving Marcus Webb, but in doing so, she had saved Xyrith too. Saved her from becoming a killer. Saved her from wasting her life on hate. Saved her from missing the chance to do something that actually mattered. The work ahead would be difficult, but Xyrith had crossed the galaxy for vengeance. Surely she could manage to stay for redemption. The transition from vengeful hunter to potential healer happened faster than Xyrith's emotional processors could properly integrate. Within hours of her decision to help Marcus Webb rather than kill him, she found herself sitting in a conference room with 3 bewildered human physicians, attempting to explain Vexnari bioelectric theory to beings whose understanding of such energy was primitive at best. The looks on their faces oscillated between skepticism and desperate hope, which she supposed was reasonable given the circumstances. After all, an alien who had infiltrated their facility under stealth protocols was now claiming she could heal a patient they had long since declared beyond help. Dr. Sarah Chun, the facility's chief medical officer, leaned forward with her hands clasped on the conference table. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that suggested she had seen enough suffering to make her both compassionate and pragmatic. "Let me make sure I understand correctly. You are proposing to use your own bioelectric energy to essentially rewrite Captain Webb's nervous system using traces of Vexnari bioelectric patterns that you claim are still present in his tissues from the original incident 20 years ago." That is a crude but essentially accurate summary, Zyrith confirmed. Her translator device, a small implant behind her auditory organs, rendered her clicks and whistles into serviceable English. The damage to Marcus Webb's nervous system is not simply physical. It exists on the bioelectric level, in the disrupted patterns that govern neural communication. Your medical technology can sustain him, can prevent further degradation, but it cannot repair what has already been corrupted because you lack the tools to work directly with bioelectric fields at the cellular level. And Vexnari possessed these tools. This question came from Dr. James Mitchell, a younger physician with the eager intensity of someone who still believed medicine could solve any problem given enough data and determination. Zyrith extended one of her feeding appendages, allowing them to observe its structure. The appendage was approximately 30 centimeters long when fully extended, segmented like an insect's antenna, and covered in microscopic sensory nodes that glittered faintly in the conference room's artificial light. These are not merely feeding organs. They are precision instruments evolved over millions of cycles to sense, manipulate, and transfer bioelectric energy with extraordinary accuracy. When we feed, we do not simply drain energy indiscriminately. We read the bioelectric signature of our prey, identify the specific neural pathways that control vital functions, and extract energy in a controlled manner that prevents immediate death. This requires sensitivity and control that your technology cannot match. The third physician, Dr. Ahmad Hassan, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and the careful demeanor of someone who had learned to distrust easy answers, spoke for the first time. That explains how you might be able to read Captain Webb's condition more precisely than our instruments. But reading is not healing. How do you propose to repair damage that our own cellular regeneration therapies have failed to address? By using Kithra's bioelectric imprint as a template, Zyrith explained. She pulled up a holographic display from her wrist-mounted computer, showing the complex three-dimensional map she had created of Marcus Webb's bioelectric field. The image was breathtaking in its intricacy, a web of light and shadow representing millions of neural connections. Areas of healthy activity glowed bright blue, while damaged regions appeared as dark voids or chaotic red tangles where neural signals misfired and died. But scattered throughout the structure, visible as subtle green traces, were the ghost patterns of Kithra's energy. When Kithra fed her own bioelectric charge into Marcus to save him from gray death, she did not simply provide raw energy. She created a resonance pattern, a kind of template that tried to maintain the stability of his nervous system even as the shock damaged it. That template has been degrading over time as her original energy dissipated, but the pattern itself remains encoded in his neural structure. If I can strengthen and stabilize that pattern, use it as a guide to rebuild the damaged connections, there is a possibility of restoration. A possibility, Dr. Chen repeated, her tone making it clear she wanted numbers, not vague hopes. I estimate a 43% chance of significant improvement, a 31% chance of modest improvement, and a 26% chance of no effect or negative outcomes, Zyrith said. Among her people, honesty about probability was considered essential in medical consultations. False hope served no one. The primary risk is that I may lack sufficient energy reserves to complete the process. Rebuilding neural pathways requires enormous quantities of bioelectric energy transferred with extreme precision over extended periods. If I run out of energy mid-procedure, the partially rebuilt pathways could destabilize, potentially causing more damage than currently exists. How do we prevent that? Dr. Mitchell asked. You do not, Zyrith said bluntly. I will monitor my own energy levels and stop the procedure before reaching critical depletion. The risk is mine alone. If I miscalculate, I die. Marcus Webb's condition will remain unchanged. The three physicians exchanged glances, engaging in some form of nonverbal human communication that Zyrith had observed but never fully understood. Finally, Dr. Chen spoke. Captain Webb's current prognosis is terminal. 2 years maximum, possibly less. Quality of life is poor and declining. From a medical ethics standpoint, any intervention that offers even a modest chance of improvement with minimal risk to the patient is worth considering. The fact that you are willing to assume personal risk to help him is remarkable. given that you apparently came here intending to kill him. I came here with incomplete information, Zyrith said, her skin flushing darker with what might have been embarrassment. I have since learned the truth. Kithara was my nestmate. We emerged from our larval states together, learned to hunt together, trained as scientists together. Her loss has been a wound I have carried for 2 decades. But I now understand that the proper way to honor her memory is not through revenge, but through continuation of her work. She died trying to save a life. I should do no less. Dr. Hassan leaned back in his chair, studying Zyrith with eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. There is another factor we must consider. Captain Webb's condition has been classified for security reasons. If we approve this procedure, and it succeeds, questions will be asked. Questions about how a foreign national, an alien national, was able to accomplish what Terran medical science could not. Those questions may lead to answers about the original incident on Vexen AR. Let them, Zyrith said firmly. I am tired of secrets. I am tired of lies told to protect political relationships while individuals suffer. If healing Marcus Webb requires exposing the truth about what happened on Vexen AR, then, so be it. Kithara deserves to be remembered for her sacrifice, not forgotten in a classified file. The 3 physicians exchanged another series of significant looks. Dr. Chen tapped something on her personal data pad, then nodded. I will need to contact the facility director and, through her, the Terran Exploration Corps command structure. A decision of this magnitude cannot be made at my level alone. But I will recommend approval. Dr. Mitchell, prepare the medical suite. If we get authorization, I want to be ready to proceed immediately. Captain Webb's condition is fragile enough that delays could be costly. What about supplies? Dr. Mitchell asked. Does Zyrith need anything specific for the procedure? I will need a sterile environment with full monitoring capability, Zyrith said. Beyond that, I require nothing you do not already possess. My ship carries supplements that will help me maintain energy levels during the procedure, but the primary tool will be my own biology. How long will the procedure take? This was Dr. Hassan, still watching her with that penetrating gaze. If all goes optimally, between 18 and 30 hours, Zyrith replied. I will need to work slowly, rebuilding each neural pathway incrementally to ensure stability before moving to the next. Rush the process, and I risk creating connections that appear functional but lack structural integrity. They would fail within days or weeks, possibly causing catastrophic seizures or cardiac arrest. 30 hours of continuous work while expending enormous amounts of your own energy, Dr. Chen said. That is beyond human endurance. Are you certain you are capable of maintaining focus for that duration? Vexnari can enter a meditative trance state that allows us to sustain complex tasks for extended periods, Zyrith explained. Our hunting ancestors would sometimes track prey for days without rest. The physiological mechanisms that enabled that behavior remain in our biology. I will not be operating at normal consciousness during much of the procedure. My higher cognitive functions will be suspended, leaving only the specialized neural clusters that control my feeding appendages and bioelectric manipulation. It is similar to your human concept of autopilot. Comforting, Dr. Hassan muttered, though his tone suggested he was actually somewhat impressed rather than concerned. The meeting continued for another hour as they worked through the technical details of the proposed procedure. Zyrith found herself gaining respect for these human physicians despite their species' relative youth on the interstellar stage. They asked intelligent questions, anticipated potential complications, and demonstrated a willingness to consider radical solutions when conventional approaches had failed. By the time they adjourned, she felt reasonably confident that if approval was granted, they would be able to work together effectively. Dr. Chen departed to make her calls to higher authorities, while Drs. Mitchell and Hassan escorted Zyrith back to Marcus Webb's room. The human lay exactly as she had left him, his eyes closed but his bioelectric signature indicating he was awake and aware. The signature was weaker than it had been a few hours ago, a reminder that time was not on their side. Captain Webb, Dr. Mitchell said gently. The Vexnari who visited you earlier has proposed a possible treatment for your condition. We need to discuss it with you. Marcus's eyes opened, finding Zyrith where she stood at the foot of his bed. A ghost of a smile crossed his ravaged face. Back already? And Here I thought you would take some time to enjoy Earth before deciding whether I was worth saving. There is nothing to decide, Xyrith said. The only question is whether your superiors will permit the attempt. I have explained the procedure to your physicians. They will explain it to you. If you consent, and if authorization is granted, we will proceed as soon as possible. For the next 30 minutes, Doctors Mitchell and Hassan walked Marcus through the proposed treatment, explaining the risks and potential outcomes with the same clinical precision they had used with Xyrith. To his credit, Marcus listened attentively, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated he understood the magnitude of what was being proposed. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he processed the information. 43% chance of significant improvement, he finally said. Those are not terrible odds, all things considered. And the worst-case scenario is my condition stays the same, which means I die in 2 years instead of potentially dying tomorrow if the procedure goes wrong. I have had worse gambles in my career. There is one thing the doctors may not have emphasized sufficiently, Xyrith said, moving closer to his bed. The procedure is extremely dangerous for me. If I miscalculate my energy reserves, if I push too far in my attempt to heal you, I could die. You need to understand that before you consent. I am not a trained medical professional. I am a xenobiologist who is proposing to attempt something my species has never attempted before. You will be entrusting your life to an alien who came here planning to kill you less than 12 hours ago. Marcus's smile widened fractionally. When you put it that way, it does sound insane. But I have been dying slowly for 20 years, and I am tired, Xyrith. I am so tired of pain, tired of watching my body fail piece by piece, tired of knowing that Kithra's sacrifice bought me nothing but a prolonged death. If there is even a small chance that you can change that, I will take it. And if you die trying to save me, well, at least I will have company on the other side. I can apologize to Kithra in person for failing to protect her work. You have not failed, Xyrith said quietly. The Grey Death vaccine has saved thousands of lives. That is not failure. Maybe, Marcus said. But it doesn't feel like success when I am lying here falling apart. Give me this chance, Xyrith. Let me live long enough to do something more with the time Kithra bought me. Let her sacrifice mean more than just a vaccine and a classified file. Before Xyrith could respond, Dr. Chun entered the room with rapid strides and an expression that suggested she had just fought several battles. Authorization is granted, she announced without preamble. I had to go all the way up to Admiral Kowalski at TC headquarters, and she had to pull strings with the Civilian Oversight Committee, but it is done. We can proceed with the experimental treatment. She paused, her expression softening slightly as she looked at Marcus. The Admiral wanted me to tell you that she is sorry, Captain Webb. Sorry for how you have suffered. Sorry for the cover-up that prevented you from getting the recognition you deserved. Sorry that it took an alien breaking into our facility for us to find a possible solution to your condition. Her words, not mine, though I happen to agree with all of them. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Tell the Admiral thank you, but no apology is necessary. The cover-up protected Kithra's reputation and preserved interspecies relations. I made my peace with that choice long ago. Nevertheless, the situation is changing, Dr. Chen said. The Admiral is initiating a review of the classification status of the incident on Vexen AR. She believes that keeping the truth hidden is no longer serving anyone's interests, and, in fact, may be preventing valuable medical knowledge from being shared. If Xyrith's procedure succeeds, the method will need to be documented and potentially taught to others. That will be difficult to do while maintaining official silence about the original incident. Politics, Marcus muttered. Always politics. But, I suppose if good comes from it, I should not complain. When can we begin? Xyrith asked, eager to move past the bureaucratic discussions and into action. She had spent 17 cycles planning revenge, and her mind was having difficulty adjusting to this new reality where she was a healer rather than a killer. Forward momentum felt essential to preventing her from spiraling into uncertainty. The medical suite will be ready in 4 hours, Dr. Chen replied. That will give you time to retrieve whatever supplies you need from your ship, and for us to prepare Captain Webb for the procedure. I am assuming you will want our monitoring systems active throughout. Yes, Xyrith confirmed. I will be working primarily through bioelectric sensation, but Having your instruments track physical changes will provide valuable correlation data. If Marcus begins to show signs of distress that I do not detect through my feeding sense, I need you to inform me immediately. Understood. We will have a full medical team standing by throughout the procedure. Dr. Mitchell will be your primary liaison. He will monitor your communications and relay information as needed. I will be overseeing from the observation room, coordinating with the support staff. What about afterwards? Dr. Hassan asked. Assuming the procedure succeeds, what kind of recovery period are we looking at? Unknown, Zyrith admitted. In theory, if I successfully rebuild the damaged neural pathways using Kithra's bioelectric imprint as a template, Marcus's body should begin to function more normally almost immediately. But there will undoubtedly be an adjustment period as his brain learns to use the newly restored pathways. It could take days or weeks for full functional recovery. He may need physical therapy to retrain muscles that have atrophied. There are too many variables to make accurate predictions. We will be ready to adapt to whatever circumstances develop, Dr. Chun said with the confidence of someone accustomed to medical uncertainty. For now, let's focus on the procedure itself. For ours, people, let's make sure we are as prepared as possible. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of activity. Zyrith returned to her ship to gather supplies, including several containers of high-density nutrient paste that would help her maintain energy levels during the procedure. The paste was standard Vexnari hunter rations, designed to provide maximum caloric and bioelectric energy in minimum volume. She also retrieved her personal medical kit, which contained monitoring devices calibrated for Vexnari physiology. If she was going to push herself to dangerous limits, she wanted her own instruments tracking her condition alongside the human equipment. When she returned to the facility, she found that word had spread among the staff. Humans stopped in corridors to stare at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. She supposed she could not blame them. A Vexnari walking freely through a Terran research facility was unusual enough. A Vexnari who had infiltrated their security to attempt an experimental medical procedure on a dying patient was probably unprecedented. She ignored the attention and made her way to the medical suite that had been prepared. The suite was impressive by human standards, a large room filled with monitoring equipment, surgical tools, and life support systems. A specialized medical bed dominated the center of the space, surrounded by holographic displays that could show every physiological parameter in real time. Doctors Chun, Mitchell, and Hassan were already present, running final checks on the equipment. They looked up when Zyrith entered, and she saw the weight of responsibility in their expressions. If this procedure failed, if Marcus Webb died or was further harmed, it would fall on all of them. Ready? Dr. Chin asked simply. As ready as I will ever be, Zyrith replied. She set down her supplies and began the process of connecting her own monitoring devices to her body. Small adhesive patches attached to strategic points, tracking her bioelectric reserves, core temperature, and metabolic rate. A heads-up display projected directly onto her visual cortex, giving her constant awareness of her own energy status. She could not afford to miscalculate during the procedure. Marcus Webb was wheeled in 30 minutes later, already sedated but not fully unconscious. Dr. Chun had explained that they wanted him in a twilight state where his nervous system would be responsive to Zyrith's manipulations, but where he would not be actively aware of the procedure. Consciousness could interfere with neural repair by introducing unpredictable thought patterns that might conflict with the rebuilding process. They positioned him on the medical bed and connected him to the facility's monitoring systems. Holographic displays sprang to life around the bed, showing his heartbeat, respiration, neural activity, and dozens of other metrics. Zyrith studied the displays, correlating them with what her feeding sense was telling her about his bioelectric condition. The data matched closely enough to give her confidence in the human equipment. Last chance to reconsider, Zyrith said, looking down at Marcus's sedated form. Once I begin, stopping midway could cause more damage than not starting at all. Proceed. Marcus mumbled through the sedation. Kithra, tell her I am sorry. You can tell her yourself when this is over, Zyrith said, though she was not certain he heard her. She looked up at Dr. Chun and nodded. Beginning procedure, Dr. Chun announced for the record. The observation room's recording systems activated, documenting everything that was about to happen. If this worked, it would become part of medical history. If it failed, it would become a cautionary tale. Either way, the truth about Kithara's sacrifice would finally be told. Xyrith extended all 4 of her feeding appendages, positioning them at strategic points on Marcus's body. One at the base of his skull, where it could directly access his spinal cord. One at his chest, over his heart, where she could monitor and, if necessary, support his cardiovascular system. And 2 at his damaged limbs, where the neural connections had been severed by amputation. She would not be able to regrow lost tissue, but she could potentially repair the neural pathways that had been damaged throughout his body, making whatever remained functional again. She closed her middle eyes, the ones used for normal vision, and opened her primary eyes wider, shifting her perception into the bioelectric spectrum. The world transformed into patterns of energy and light. Marcus Webb's body became a constellation of signals, some bright and clear, others dim or chaotic. And there, woven throughout like threads of green light, were the traces of Kithara's bioelectric signature. Xyrith felt her 3 hearts skip beats simultaneously as she fully perceived what her nestmate had left behind. It was not just a residual pattern. It was a message, a gift. Kithara had known her sacrifice would damage Marcus even as it saved him, and she had tried to leave behind a template for healing, a map that could guide restoration if anyone ever had the skills and determination to follow it. "I see you," Xyrith whispered in her native language, tears forming in her eyes. "I understand now. You did not just save him. You left me a way to save him too. One last collaboration, sister. One last hunt together." She began to feed her own bioelectric energy into Marcus's body, following the template Kithara had created. It was delicate work, requiring more precision than anything she had attempted before. Each neural pathway needed to be rebuilt cell by cell, each connection tested and reinforced before moving to the next. Too much energy at once, and she would fry the neurons she was trying to heal. Too little, and the pathways would not properly form. She had to maintain a perfect balance, reading Marcus's responses through her feeding sense and adjusting in real time. Hours passed. Xyrith was only dimly aware of the activity in the room around her, of the human physicians monitoring displays and making notations, of her own energy reserves slowly depleting. Her consciousness had narrowed to a single point of focus, the intricate dance of bioelectric manipulation that was gradually, incrementally, rebuilding what had been broken. Somewhere around the 12-hour mark, she detected a change. The neural pathways she had been rebuilding were beginning to show spontaneous activity, firing signals on their own rather than just responding to her direct stimulation. It was working. Marcus's nervous system was remembering how to function. The template Kithara had left was integrating with the repairs Xyrith was making, creating stable new connections that could sustain themselves. Heart rate increasing, Dr. Mitchell announced. Blood pressure rising. Neural activity spiking in the prefrontal cortex. "Is he waking up?" Dr. Hassan asked with concern in his voice. "No," Xyrith managed to say, her voice strained with effort. "He is healing. His brain is recognizing the new pathways and attempting to use them. This is good. Monitor him closely, but do not intervene unless critical thresholds are breached." She continued working, her feeding appendages moving in complex patterns as she extended her repair efforts further into Marcus's damaged nervous system. The work was exhausting in ways she had never experienced before. This was not the simple act of draining prey that her appendages had evolved for. This was creation, restoration, requiring her to give rather than take, to build rather than destroy. Every instinct she possessed was screaming that she was doing this wrong, that she should be extracting energy, not donating it, that she should be seeking prey, not healing it. But she pushed through the instinctive resistance, guided by the memory of Kithara and the determination to honor her nestmate's sacrifice. If Kithara could give her life for a human she barely knew, Xyrith could endure discomfort and exhaustion to finish what her sister had started. 20 hours into the procedure, Xyrith's energy reserves reached critical levels. The displays on her heads-up device were flashing warnings, indicating that she was approaching the threshold below which her own autonomic functions could begin to fail. She needed to stop soon, or the physician's earlier concerns about her dying mid-procedure would become a real possibility. But she was so close. She could sense the endpoint approaching, could feel Marcus's nervous system stabilizing and integrating the repairs. Just a little more work on the damaged sections near his spinal cord, just a few more pathways rebuilt, and she would reach a point where his body could continue the healing process on its own. She could rest then. She could replenish her reserves and survive. Xyrith made a decision. She would push for 2 more hours, bringing the total to 22, and then stop regardless of whether the work was fully complete. It was a compromise between the ideal outcome and survival, between her desire to perfectly honor Kithara's gift and her responsibility not to throw away her own life needlessly. The final 2 hours were agony. Her feeding appendages trembled with exhaustion, and she could feel her consciousness flickering at the edges, threatening to collapse into the emergency hibernation state that Vexnari entered when energy depletion became life-threatening. She fought the hibernation instinct with every shred of willpower she possessed, maintaining her focus through sheer determination. And then, finally, she reached the end. The last neural pathway was rebuilt. The final connection was made. Kithara's template was fully integrated with Marcus's nervous system, no longer a ghost, but a living part of his biology. Xyrith withdrew her feeding appendages and immediately collapsed, her legs unable to support her weight any longer. She was dimly aware of someone catching her, of being lowered gently to the floor, of urgent voices speaking in languages she could no longer process. Her vision faded to black, and Xyrith surrendered to the exhaustion that had been building for 22 hours. Her last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was a simple hope that it had been enough. That Marcus would live. That Kithara's sacrifice would finally mean something beyond pain and secrets. Then, darkness took her, and she knew nothing more. Xyrith woke to the sensation of warmth flowing into her body through multiple connection points. Her consciousness emerged gradually from the deep hibernation state, each layer of awareness activating in sequence as her brain received enough bioelectric energy to function. First came basic environmental perception, temperature, air composition, ambient sound. Then, spatial awareness and proprioception, telling her she was lying on a padded surface in a climate-controlled room. Finally, her higher cognitive functions came online, and with them came memory of what she had done and fear of what might have resulted. She opened her primary eyes first, the ones that perceived bioelectric fields, and was immediately overwhelmed by the density of signatures surrounding her. Multiple Vexnari were present, she realized with shock. At least 7 distinct bioelectric patterns, all familiar in the way that indicated they were members of her own clanship. How had they gotten here? How long had she been unconscious? She opened her secondary eyes, shifting to normal visual perception, and found herself in a recovery room very different from the austere medical suite where the procedure had taken place. The room was large and comfortably furnished, with soft lighting that mimicked the dim red spectrum of Vexnari twilight. Several of her clanmates were present, including Syrath, her nest parent who had trained her in the hunting arts, and Vextoral, the clanship's medical specialist. They noticed her awakening immediately and moved closer, their skin cycling through colors that expressed relief and concern in equal measure. "Welcome back, little hunter," Syrath said, using the affectionate diminutive they had called her since her larval days. "You gave us quite the fright. When you failed to report in for 3 standard cycles, we came looking for you. Imagine our surprise when we arrived in this system to find you in energy hibernation after performing what the humans are calling a miracle. 3 cycles." Xyrith tried to sit up and discovered that multiple bioelectric feeding lines were connected to her, delivering sustaining energy directly into her system. "I have been unconscious for 3 cycles. Nearly 4 now," Vextoral corrected, gently restraining her from moving too suddenly. "You depleted yourself to within a whisker of permanent damage. Your energy reserves were at 17% of minimum sustainable levels when these human physicians found you. Another hour, perhaps 2, and you would have crossed the threshold into irreversible hibernation. They saved your life by connecting you to their medical equipment and maintaining your basic functions until we arrived with proper Vexnari life support. Xyrath's feeding appendages twitched involuntarily, expressing her distress. Marcus Webb, did the procedure work? Is he alive? Xyrath's skin flashed through a complex pattern of colors that Xyrath recognized as profound approval mixed with amazement. Not only alive, but recovering beyond anyone's expectations. The human physicians describe his improvement as unprecedented in modern medical history. Neural pathways that had been dead for 2 decades are showing activity. Muscles that had atrophied are beginning to respond to signals from his brain. They believe that with physical therapy and time, he may regain significant functionality, possibly even enough to walk again with prosthetic assistance. Relief flooded through Xyrath so powerfully that her skin cycled through every color in the Vexnari emotional spectrum. She had done it. Against all probability, despite her inexperience and the enormous risks, she had succeeded in healing Marcus Webb. Kithara's sacrifice had been honored. The legacy her nestmate had left behind would continue. There is more you should know, Vextoral said, their tone shifting to something more serious. Your actions here have caused quite the disruption in both Terran and Vexnari diplomatic circles. The Terran authorities have declassified the incident on Vexenar and made the truth about Kithara's sacrifice public. There are calls from multiple worlds for greater cooperation in bioelectric medicine, for Vexnari and humans to work together on developing treatments for conditions that were previously considered incurable. You have inadvertently started what some are calling a medical revolution. I only wanted to save one life, Xyrath said quietly. One human who carried a piece of my nestmate within him. And in doing so, you may have saved thousands, Xyrath replied. The Council of Nests has sent official commendations. The Terran Exploration Corps has requested permission to establish a joint research program. Even the collective, those isolationist fools, have expressed interest in learning more about what you accomplished. You are famous, little hunter, across multiple species and dozens of worlds. The thought of fame made Xyrath's skin flash dark with discomfort. I am not a hero. I came to Earth intending to commit murder. If Marcus Webb had been the villain I imagined, I would have killed him without hesitation or remorse. The fact that I ended up healing him instead was not virtue but luck. Luck that he was generous enough to tell me the truth. Luck that Kithara left behind a template I could follow. Luck that I did not kill him before I learned better. Perhaps, Vextoral said. But you made a choice when you learned the truth. You could have walked away, could have returned to the clanship and forgotten about the human and his suffering. Instead, you chose to risk your own life to save his. That was not luck. That was compassion, a quality that Kithara obviously valued and that you have inherited from her. Before Xyrath could respond, the room's door opened, and Dr. Chen entered, accompanied by Dr. Mitchell. They both looked exhausted, but pleased, and they brightened further when they saw Xyrath was awake. Welcome back, Dr. Chen said warmly. You scared us badly when you collapsed. We managed to keep your basic systems running, but we were far out of our depth trying to treat a Vexnari in energy depletion. Thank goodness your clanship arrived when it did. Thank you for sustaining me until my kin could arrive, Xyrath said formally. And for caring for Marcus Webb after I lost consciousness. How is he truly? My clanmates say he is improving, but I need to assess him myself to know if the procedure was actually successful or if I merely delayed the inevitable. Why don't we let you see for yourself? Dr. Mitchell suggested. He has been asking about you constantly. When he is not working with the physical therapists, he is demanding updates on your condition. I think seeing you awake and recovering will do him as much good as any medicine we could prescribe. Xyrath looked to Vextoral, who made a gesture of permission. You are still weak, but a short visit should not cause harm. Keep the feeding lines connected for now. We can make them portable. 10 minutes later, Xyrath found herself being wheeled down the corridor in a mobile support chair, still connected to the bioelectric support systems that were slowly replenishing her depleted reserves. The humans who passed in the corridor no longer stared at her with fear or suspicion. Instead, their expressions showed respect and gratitude. She found the attention disconcerting, preferring the anonymous hostility she had received when she first arrived. Marcus Webb's room had been moved to a larger space that could accommodate the extensive physical therapy equipment he now required. When Xyrith entered, she found him suspended in an exoskeleton harness, attempting to move his remaining leg while therapists monitored his progress. He was drenched in sweat, his face contorted with effort, but there was life in his expression that had been absent during her first visit. His eyes found her immediately, and his face split into a grin that was equal parts exhaustion and joy. "Xyrith," he said breathlessly, "they told me you nearly died. I would have stopped you if I had known you were pushing yourself that hard. You were sedated and could not have stopped me regardless," Xyrith replied, studying his bioelectric signature with her feeding sense. What she detected made her feeding appendages tremble with satisfaction. The neural pathways she had rebuilt were not only intact but strengthening, forming new connections and integrating more fully with his existing nervous system. The work was far from complete, but the foundation she had laid was solid. His body was continuing the healing process on its own, exactly as she had hoped. "Fair point," Marcus conceded. The therapist lowered him back into a wheeled chair, and he waved them away politely before rolling closer to Xyrith. "I do not have words adequate to thank you. For 4 years I've been confined to a bed, unable to move without assistance, watching my body fail piece by piece. Now the doctors tell me I might walk again, that I might be able to use my remaining arm without the tremors that have plagued me for decades, that the constant pain might actually decrease rather than continuing to worsen. You gave me back my life." "Kithara gave you your life," Xyrith corrected. "I merely finished what she started. The template she left in your bioelectric field was the true miracle. All I did was recognize it and have the skills necessary to follow it." "Then, you gave me back Kithara's gift," Marcus said, "which amounts to the same thing from my perspective." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "I have been told that the truth about what happened on Vexenar has been made public. That Kithara is being recognized for her sacrifice. How do you feel about that?" Xyrith considered the question carefully. "Conflicted," she finally admitted. "Part of me is glad that she will be remembered as a hero rather than forgotten in classified files. But another part of me resents that it took 20 years and my near death for the truth to come out. If the authorities had been honest from the beginning, perhaps other lives could have been saved sooner. Perhaps the technique I used on you could have been developed and refined through proper research rather than being attempted for the first time in desperation." "You are not wrong," Marcus agreed. "But I have learned over the past 20 years that anger at past mistakes is less useful than focus on future improvements. The cover-up was wrong, but it is over now. The question is what we do with the knowledge and opportunity we have been given." The Terran medical community is extremely interested in learning more about Vexnari bioelectric manipulation. There is talk of establishing a joint research program, training Vexnari in human medicine and humans in Vexnari energy work. If such a program succeeds, the techniques you pioneered could help millions. "I am a xenobiologist, not a physician," Xyrith protested. "I would not know where to begin teaching others what I did. Most of it was instinctive, guided by my feeding sense rather than conscious thought." "Then, perhaps that is where the research should start," suggested a new voice from the doorway. Xyrith turned to see a human woman in her 60s, wearing the uniform of a Terran Exploration Corps admiral. The woman's bioelectric signature was strong and clear, indicating excellent health despite her age. "Admiral Janet Kowalski." The woman introduced herself. "I am the TC officer who authorized your procedure and who has been coordinating with your clanship since they arrived. I wanted to meet you personally and extend the gratitude of both the Terran government and the Exploration Corps for what you have done." Xyrith's skin flushed with embarrassment. "I attempted to infiltrate a secure facility with intent to commit murder. Gratitude seems an inappropriate response. You came here based on false information and revised your intentions when presented with the truth," Admiral Kowalski replied, moving into the room with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. "That demonstrates flexibility and wisdom, not criminality. More importantly, you risked your own life to save one of my officers when you had every reason to hate him. That is heroism by any reasonable definition." "I simply did what Kithara would have done," Xyrith said. "No more, no less. And that is precisely why we need your help," the Admiral said. Kithara believed that knowledge and healing should transcend species barriers. She died protecting that belief. You have honored her memory by following her example. Now we have an opportunity to institutionalize that approach, to make it standard practice rather than a rare exception. The joint research program I mentioned is not just talk. We have funding, we have facilities, and we have interest from multiple species beyond just humans and Vexnari. What we need are people who understand both the technical aspects of bioelectric medicine and the philosophical importance of cross-species cooperation. People like you. Xyrith felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. You are asking me to abandon my research career, my position within the clanship, to become a teacher and researcher in a field I barely understand myself. I am asking you to help us build something that has never existed before, Admiral Kowalski corrected. A truly integrated approach to medicine that draws on the strengths of multiple species. Humans have developed impressive surgical techniques and pharmaceutical interventions. Vexnari understand bioelectric manipulation in ways we are only beginning to grasp. The collective has mastered cellular regeneration. The ZHRN have psychological healing practices that seem almost magical. Imagine what we could accomplish if we combined all of that knowledge, if we trained physicians who could draw on techniques from a dozen different species. It would take decades to establish such a program, Xyrith pointed out. Perhaps longer. The technical challenges alone would be formidable, to say nothing of the cultural and political obstacles. All the more reason to start immediately, Marcus interjected. Xyrith, I have spent 20 years as a living example of what happens when we fail to collaborate across species lines. If Kithara and I had been working in an integrated medical framework with access to both human and Vexnari expertise, she might not have needed to sacrifice herself. There might have been other options, safer options, that we simply did not know about because our species were still learning to trust each other. Help us build a future where that kind of tragedy becomes impossible. Xyrith looked between Marcus, Admiral Kowalski, and her own clanmates who had remained silent throughout this exchange. Cyratha's skin showed colors of encouragement and pride. Vextoral's pattern suggested approval mixed with concern, probably related to the enormous commitment being requested. But both of them, she realized, would support whatever decision she made. I need time to consider this, Xyrith finally said. I cannot make a decision of this magnitude while still recovering from energy depletion and processing everything that has happened. My mission here was supposed to be simple, revenge, and then return home. Instead, I find myself at the center of a diplomatic initiative that could reshape medicine across multiple species. That is not a small adjustment to make. Take all the time you need, Admiral Kowalski said. But know that the offer stands regardless of how long you deliberate. You have already proven yourself capable of extraordinary things. Whether you choose to continue this work or return to your previous life, you will have the support and gratitude of the Terran government. The Admiral departed shortly after, leaving Xyrith alone with Marcus and her clanmates. An awkward silence settled over the room, broken finally by Cyratha's amused clicking. Well, little hunter, you certainly know how to create chaos. You leave the clanship on what was supposed to be a simple vengeance quest, and return having started an interstellar medical revolution. I suppose I should not be surprised. You always did have a talent for exceeding expectations. This is not funny, Xyrith protested, though she felt a flutter of humor despite herself. I am completely unprepared for anything that has been proposed. My expertise is in xenobiology, specifically the study of fungal infections and parasitic organisms. I know nothing about establishing research programs or training physicians. You knew nothing about healing severe neural damage either, Marcus pointed out. That did not stop you from succeeding. Sometimes the best person for a revolutionary task is someone who does not yet know all the reasons why it should be impossible. That is terrible logic, Xyrith said. But she was smiling despite herself, or at least making the Vexnari equivalent of a smile, which involved specific color patterns rather than facial expressions. Perhaps, Marcus agreed. But it is also true. Look, you do not have to decide anything today or even this week. Focus on recovering your strength. Spend time with your clanmates. Think about what you want your life to look like moving forward. The opportunity will still be here when you are ready to consider it seriously. Xyrith appreciated his understanding. But she also knew herself well enough to recognize that her decision was already half made. Kithara had died trying to bridge the gap between species through science and medicine. The research program being proposed was a direct continuation of that work, but on a scale that her nestmate could never have imagined. To walk away from such an opportunity would be to reject everything Kithara had believed in, everything she had sacrificed herself for. But there was more to consider than just honoring Kithara's memory. Xyrath had to think about her own needs, her own life, and aspirations. She had been happy as a xenobiologist aboard her clan ship, pursuing research questions that fascinated her, living among kin who understood and accepted her. The life being offered was completely different, living among aliens on their homeworld, constantly navigating cultural differences, teaching skills she barely understood herself. It would be difficult, frustrating, and sometimes lonely. Was she willing to accept those costs? Over the following days, as Xyrath recovered her strength and spent time exploring the research facility and its surroundings, she found herself increasingly drawn to the idea despite its challenges. The human physicians she spoke with were genuinely excited about the possibility of learning Vexnari techniques. They asked intelligent questions, demonstrated remarkable creativity in proposing how different approaches might be combined, and treated her as a respected colleague rather than an exotic curiosity. The facility itself, while built for human comfort, had already begun adapting spaces to accommodate Vexnari needs, installing low-spectrum lighting and adjusting temperature controls in areas where she spent time. Most importantly, she watched Marcus Webb's continued recovery and saw firsthand the impact her intervention had made. His progress was faster than anyone had predicted, driven by what Dr. Chin described as his sheer stubborn refusal to let Kithara's sacrifice be wasted. He worked with the physical therapist for hours each day, pushing himself to the edge of exhaustion and then, beyond, determined to reclaim as much functionality as possible. Within a week of Xyrath waking from hibernation, he was able to stand unassisted for brief periods using a walker. Within 2 weeks, he took his first stumbling steps. Xyrath watched those first steps from the therapy room's observation window, and she felt something shift in her chest. This was why Kithara had sacrificed herself, not for abstract ideals or political considerations, but for the simple, profound joy of seeing someone reclaim their life after it had been stolen by injury or illness. This was the work that truly mattered, the work that made a difference beyond publications and research grants and academic prestige. On the 15th day after waking from hibernation, Xyrath asked for a private meeting with Admiral Kowalski, Marcus Webb, and her nest parent Xyrath. They gathered in one of the facility's conference rooms, which had been modified with both human and Vexnari seating arrangements. Xyrath stood before them, her skin deliberately neutral in color to hide her nervousness, and made her decision known. "I will accept the position and help establish the Joint Medical Research Program," she said formally. "Not because I believe I am particularly qualified or because I think success is guaranteed, but because Kithara believed that healing should transcend species boundaries, and I cannot honor her memory better than by trying to make that belief a reality. I have conditions, however." "Name them," Admiral Kowalski said immediately. "First, I will not work alone. I need colleagues from my own species, researchers, and physicians who can provide expertise I lack. I am requesting that the Terran government formally invite at least 5 Vexnari medical specialists to join this program, with full support for relocation and accommodation." Easily granted, the Admiral confirmed. "We had already planned to extend such invitations. Having your personal recommendation for specific individuals would be helpful. Second, this cannot be exclusively a human Vexnari program. The collective, the Zhrin, and other species must be included from the beginning. If we are truly attempting to create an integrated approach to medicine, we need diverse perspectives. More complicated politically, but I agree with the principle," Admiral Kowalski said. "I will work with our diplomatic corps to extend invitations to other species. It may take time to establish all the necessary agreements, but we will make it happen." Third, Marcus Webb must be involved in the program as both a researcher and a patient. His unique experience of being healed through cross-species collaboration makes him invaluable for understanding what works and what is not. More importantly, his perspective on the human side of the equation will be essential for training future physicians. Marcus looked surprised. I am not a physician. My training is in xenobiology, same as yours. Exactly, Zyrith said. You understand what it is like to need healing, to be vulnerable and dependent on the expertise of others. That understanding is more valuable than any number of medical degrees. Besides, you are already planning to write about your experience. Why not contribute directly to the research program as well? He would need to be cleared medically first. Dr. Chin interjected from where she had been listening near the doorway. But, assuming his recovery continues at its current pace, I see no reason why he could not take on a teaching and research role in 6 months to a year. Then, it is settled, Admiral Kowalski said, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone who had just accomplished a difficult objective. We have our first faculty member, we have a framework for expansion, and we have a timeline for beginning operations. This calls for celebration. But Zyrith held up a feeding appendage to forestall any premature festivities. There is one more condition, and it is not negotiable. Kithara must be formally recognized as the co-founder of this program. Her name must appear on all official documentation. Her sacrifice must be taught to every student who enters the program. And there must be a permanent memorial at the facility honoring her contribution. She died to make this possible. I will not allow her to be forgotten. The room fell silent for a moment. Then, Syrath stood, their skin cycling through colors that expressed profound approval and emotional depth. Well spoken, little hunter. Kithara was my student before she was your nestmate, and I am pleased to see her memory honored so thoroughly. It will be done, Admiral Kowalski said quietly. The Kithara Institute for Cross-Species Medical Studies. How does that sound? Zyrith felt tears forming in her primary eyes, a physiological response that Vexnari shared with humans despite their evolutionary distance. Perfect, she managed to say. That is perfect. Marcus rolled his chair closer and extended his remaining hand. Zyrith recognized the gesture as a human expression of partnership and respect. She extended one feeding appendage and wrapped it gently around his hand, careful not to activate her feeding mechanisms. It was an unprecedented act of trust on both sides, a human allowing a predator's feeding organ to touch him voluntarily, a Vexnari deliberately suppressing her instincts to see past prey and recognize an equal. To Kithara, Marcus said softly, and to the future she believed in. To Kithara, Zyrith echoed. May we prove worthy of her sacrifice. Around them, the others repeated the sentiment, each in their own language and manner. And, in that moment, surrounded by humans and Vexnari united in common purpose, Zyrith finally understood what Kithara had tried to teach her through example, that the greatest hunts were not for prey but for knowledge, that the truest strength came not from taking but from giving, and that sometimes the most profound vengeance was simply to prove that the thing which killed someone you loved could not prevent you from living fully, loving deeply, and working tirelessly to ensure that no one else would suffer the same loss. She had come to Earth seeking blood and found purpose instead. She had intended to end a life and ended up saving one. And, in the process, she had discovered that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. Not just capable of healing physical wounds, but of healing the wounds between species, between cultures, between strangers who might otherwise have remained forever apart. The work ahead would be difficult, but Zyrith had crossed the galaxy for vengeance. Surely she could manage to stay for hope. 6 months after Zyrith made her decision to stay on Earth and help establish the Kithara Institute, the reality of her choice had become both more rewarding and more challenging than she had anticipated. The former Terran research facility in Alaska had been transformed into something unprecedented in interstellar history, a fully operational medical research and training center staffed by physicians and scientists from 5 different species, all working together to develop integrated approaches to healthcare that drew on the unique strengths of each culture's medical traditions. The physical transformation of the facility had been extensive. New buildings had been constructed to accommodate the environmental needs of different species. The Vexnari contingent, which now numbered 7 including Xyrith, required low-light spaces with carefully controlled temperature ranges. The 3 Zhrin physicians who had joined the program needed high-humidity environments and access to the specialized meditation chambers that were essential to their psycho-spiritual healing practices. The 2 collective representatives, beings of crystalline structure who communicated through harmonic resonances, needed spaces where they could work without interference from electromagnetic fields. And the human staff, who still formed the majority of the Institute's population, needed their own zones optimized for their comfort. Managing this diversity had proven to be a constant challenge. Simple things that humans took for granted, like scheduling meetings or preparing meals, became complex negotiations when dealing with species who operated on different circadian rhythms and consumed entirely different forms of sustenance. More than once, Xyrith had found herself mediating disputes that arose from fundamental misunderstandings about communication styles, personal space, or appropriate professional behavior. Being thrust into an administrative and diplomatic role was not something her training as a xenobiologist had prepared her for, but she had learned to adapt through trial and considerable error. Today's challenge involved a particularly delicate situation. One of the first cross-species training cohorts, a mixed group of physicians and medical students from multiple worlds, was preparing to observe their first practical demonstration of Vexnari bioelectric healing. The patient was a human woman named Elena Rodriguez, a former military pilot who had suffered severe spinal damage during a shuttle accident 3 years ago. She had been paralyzed from the waist down ever since, with conventional human medicine offering no realistic hope of recovery. Elena had volunteered to be treated using the experimental technique Xyrith had pioneered with Marcus Webb, understanding that success was far from guaranteed. Xyrith stood in the observation room overlooking the medical theater, watching the students file in and take their seats. They were an impressive group, representing genuine hope for the future of cross-species medicine. But they were also inexperienced, unprepared for the reality of what they were about to witness. Vexnari healing was not a gentle process. It involved feeding appendages piercing flesh, massive transfers of bioelectric energy that could cause involuntary muscle spasms, and hours of intensive work that could be uncomfortable to observe even for trained physicians. Nervous, Marcus Webb's voice came from beside her. He had become her closest colleague over the past months, and also something she might describe as a friend, though the concept of friendship between such different species was still new territory for both of them. His recovery had been remarkable, exceeding even the optimistic predictions. He now walked with only a slight limp using a sophisticated prosthetic leg, and his remaining arm had regained full functionality. More importantly, his mind was as sharp as ever, and he had thrown himself into the work of the Institute with an enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. Anxious, Xyrith corrected. Nervous implies fear of failure. I am anxious about managing expectations. The students want to see miracles, but healing is never miraculous. It is methodical, exhausting work that sometimes succeeds and sometimes does not. Elena understands this, but I am not certain the observers do. Then, educate them, Marcus said simply. That is why we are here, is it not? To teach the next generation how to think about healing in ways that transcend species-specific approaches. Let them see the reality, including the difficult parts. They need to understand that this work requires commitment and sacrifice, not just technical skill. Xyrith clicked her agreement. She had given similar speeches to herself numerous times over the past months, but hearing it from Marcus reinforced her resolve. She straightened her posture, checked that her translator was properly calibrated, and activated the observation room's communication system. Students, she began, her voice projecting into the medical theater below. You are about to observe a Vexnari bioelectric healing procedure performed on a human patient with severe neural damage. Before we begin, I need to establish clear expectations. This is not a demonstration of superior alien technology or magical healing powers. What you will witness is the application of techniques that have evolved over millions of years in my species, adapted for use on a different biology, performed by someone who is still learning how to refine these methods for cross-species application. It will be messy, uncomfortable to watch, and there are no guarantees of success. She paused, scanning the faces of the students. Most showed appropriate seriousness, though a few still had the eager excitement of people expecting to witness something extraordinary. Those were the ones who would likely struggle most with the reality. You will see my feeding appendages, which many species find disturbing or frightening. You will see patient distress, even though Elena is sedated. You will see me working for many hours in a trance state where I may not be able to respond to questions or concerns. If at any point the observation becomes too disturbing, you are free to leave without judgment. But if you stay, I expect you to learn not just the technical aspects, but the deeper truth, that healing across species lines requires us to overcome our instinctive responses to beings who are fundamentally different from ourselves. It requires trust that goes beyond logic, compassion that exceeds comfort, and dedication that survives doubt. In the medical theater below, Elena was being prepared for the procedure. Dr. Chun and her team moved with practiced efficiency, connecting monitoring equipment and positioning Elena on the specialized medical bed that had been designed to accommodate both human patients and veterinary practitioners. Elena herself appeared calm, her bioelectric signature showing only minor anxiety despite the magnitude of what she was about to undergo. Zyrith had spent considerable time with her over the past weeks, explaining the procedure in detail and ensuring she understood both the potential benefits and risks. That preparation was evident in her current composure. Zyrith left the observation room and made her way down to the medical theater, her clanmates Vextoral and 2 other veterinary physicians accompanying her. While Zyrith would be performing the primary healing work, the others would assist by monitoring her energy levels and providing supplemental bioelectric support if she began to deplete herself dangerously. They had learned from Zyrith's near-death experience with Marcus that proper support systems were essential for this kind of intensive work. Ready? Zyrith asked Elena directly, bypassing Dr. Chun and the other human staff. This was important. The patient's consent and understanding needed to be reaffirmed right up until the procedure began. As ready as I will ever be, Elena replied. Her voice was steady despite the sedatives beginning to take effect. 3 years in a wheelchair is a long time, doctor. If you can give me back even a portion of what I lost, it will be worth whatever I have to endure. I will do everything in my capability, Zyrith promised. But you must understand that even if the procedure succeeds technically, recovery will take months of intensive therapy. The neural pathways I rebuild will need to be reinforced through use, which will require patience and determination. I have both in abundance, Elena said, a slight smile crossing her face. Pilots learn patience during long flights and determination during emergency landings. I am prepared for the journey, however long it takes. Zyrith felt her skin cycle to warm colors, expressing approval and respect. She had chosen Elena carefully from dozens of volunteers, not just because her injury was technically suitable for the procedure, but because her psychological profile suggested she had the mental resilience required for recovery. Too many physicians, in Zyrith's observation, focused exclusively on physical healing while neglecting the emotional and psychological dimensions. But healing was holistic, requiring mind and body to work together. Elena understood this intuitively. Then, let us begin, Zyrith said. She positioned herself beside Elena's medical bed and extended her 4 feeding appendages. The students in the observation room above leaned forward, their attention completely focused on what was about to happen. Zyrith could feel the weight of their expectations, their hopes that they might witness something that would change their understanding of medicine forever. She only hoped she could live up to those hopes without allowing them to cloud her judgment or push her to take unnecessary risks. She placed her feeding appendages at strategic points along Elena's spine, feeling through her feeding since the extent of the damage. The spinal cord had been crushed in 2 locations, severing the neural pathways that carried signals from brain to lower body. Conventional wisdom held that such damage was permanent, that once the spinal cord was severed, the gap was too large for natural healing to bridge. But Zyrith's feeding sense revealed something that human instruments could not detect. While the physical structure of the spinal cord was indeed severed, the bioelectric fields that should have connected through those pathways were still present, weakly attempting to reach across the gap. It was like seeing ghost limbs, phantom connections that the body insisted should still exist. This was the foundation upon which Vexnari healing worked. By reading these phantom connections, Xyrith could determine where the neural pathways should be and use her own bioelectric energy to rebuild them. The process required her to essentially become a living bridge, channeling energy across the damaged sections while simultaneously stimulating cellular growth and neural regeneration. It was far more complex than simply feeding energy into a system and hoping for the best. Xyrith shifted into her working trance, allowing her higher cognitive functions to step back while the specialized neural clusters that controlled her feeding abilities took over. To an outside observer, she appeared motionless except for the subtle movements of her feeding appendages as they adjusted position and penetrated Elena's skin at precise points along her spine. But within her feeding sense, Xyrith was intensely active, reading bioelectric patterns with extraordinary precision and responding with equally precise adjustments to her energy output. Time became meaningless in the trance state. Xyrith was aware of her surroundings only in the most basic sense, enough to monitor Elena's vital signs and respond to any critical changes, but not enough to track hours or process complex information. Her world had narrowed to the intricate dance of bioelectric patterns, the careful rebuilding of neural pathways one cellular connection at a time. The first few hours were dedicated to mapping the damage in exhaustive detail. Xyrith needed to understand not just where the physical breaks were, but how Elena's nervous system had adapted to the injury over 3 years. The body was remarkably clever at finding workarounds, creating alternative pathways, and redistributing functions to compensate for lost capabilities. Some of these adaptations were helpful and needed to be preserved. Others were counterproductive, representing the body's desperate, but ultimately futile attempts to restore function through means that could never fully succeed. Part of Xyrith's task was distinguishing between the two and making decisions about which pathways to rebuild and which to redirect. Around the 6th hour, she began the actual reconstruction work. This was the dangerous part, where she would need to feed massive amounts of bioelectric energy into damaged tissue while simultaneously stimulating cellular growth and neural differentiation. Too much energy, and she would burn out the cells she was trying to heal. Too little, and the neural pathways would fail to form properly. The balance was delicate, requiring constant adjustment based on Elena's responses. From the observation room, the students watched in silence as Xyrith worked. Several had left already, unable to handle the intensity of witnessing the procedure. But most remained, transfixed by what they were seeing. The monitoring displays showed Elena's neural activity in real time, and even those with limited medical training could see the dramatic changes occurring. Sections of her spinal cord that had shown no activity for years were suddenly lighting up with signals. Pathways that had been dark were beginning to glow with life. Dr. Chen monitored both patient and physician with equal attention, ready to intervene if either showed signs of critical distress. She had worked closely with Xyrith over the past months, learning to read Vexnari bioelectric signs and understand when intervention was necessary versus when it would only interfere with the healing process. It was a delicate balance, trusting an alien physician to know her own limits while also maintaining responsibility for patient safety. Beside her, Marcus watched with the intensity of someone who had experienced exactly what Elena was going through. He could remember only fragments of his own procedure, confused impressions of sensation and emotion filtered through heavy sedation. But he remembered waking up afterwards and feeling, for the first time in years, that his body belonged to him again. The chronic pain that had been his constant companion had diminished. The tremors that had made fine motor control impossible had disappeared. The sense of being trapped in a failing body had lifted, replaced by genuine hope for the future. He wanted that for Elena. He wanted it for every patient who came through the Institute's doors. The procedure stretched into its 10th hour, then 12th, then 14th. Xyrith's support team rotated periodically, ensuring fresh eyes were always monitoring her energy levels. Twice they provided supplemental bioelectric infusions when her reserves dropped too low, but she managed her energy more effectively than during her first attempt with Marcus. Experience had taught her where she could push hard and where she needed to conserve, how to read the feedback from the healing tissue and adjust her approach accordingly. Finally, after 16 hours of continuous work, Zyrith began to withdraw. She did not emerge suddenly from her trance, but rather gradually, allowing her higher cognitive functions to come back online in controlled stages. As her awareness expanded beyond the narrow focus of the healing work, she became conscious of her physical exhaustion, of the deep fatigue that came from hours of intense concentration and energy expenditure. But she also felt satisfaction. The work had gone well. Not perfectly. There had been sections where the damage proved more extensive than anticipated and where she had needed to take alternative approaches, but well enough that she was confident of a positive outcome. She fully retracted her feeding appendages and stepped back from Elena's bed, swaying slightly as the full weight of her exhaustion hit her. Immediately, Vextoral was there to steady her, providing support both physical and energetic. Status? Dr. Chen asked, her attention still primarily on Elena's monitoring displays. Neural pathways successfully rebuilt across both damaged sections, Zyrith reported, her voice rough from hours of non-use. Approximately 87% of original functionality restored at the bioelectric level. Physical healing will take significantly longer, but the foundation is established. With proper therapy and time, I estimate Elena should regain substantial motor control and sensation in her lower body. Substantial meaning? Dr. Chen pressed, wanting specifics. Walking independently within 6 months, Zyrith said. Running within a year. Full athletic capability possibly within 2 years, though that will depend on her dedication to physical therapy and whether any complications arise during recovery. The observation room erupted in excited chatter as students processed what they had just witnessed. Several were openly weeping, overwhelmed by the emotional impact of seeing someone who had been paralyzed for 3 years receive genuine hope of recovery. Others were frantically taking notes or reviewing recordings, already trying to understand the technical details of what Zyrith had accomplished. But Zyrith paid little attention to the students. Her focus was on Elena, who was beginning to emerge from sedation. The woman's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to awareness as she remembered where she was and what had happened. Dr. Zyrith? Elena's voice was weak, but clear. Did it work? The procedure was successful, Zyrith confirmed. But we will not know the full extent of recovery until you begin physical therapy. Do not attempt to move yet. Your body needs time to adjust to the new neural pathways. I can feel something, Elena said, her voice filling with wonder. My legs. I could not feel them before, but now there is sensation. Tingles, pressure where the blanket touches. I can feel my legs. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now, and Zyrith found herself experiencing a surge of emotion that surprised her with its intensity. This was why Kithara had sacrificed herself. This moment, this transition from despair to hope, from disability to potential. This was the work that truly mattered. Rest now, Zyrith said gently, surprised by how tender her voice had become. Your body has been through significant trauma today. We will begin therapy tomorrow, but for now, simply rest and let the healing continue. As Elena was wheeled to recovery, Zyrith made her way back to the observation room to address the students. They greeted her with spontaneous applause, a human gesture of respect that she had learned to accept even though it still felt strange to her sensibilities. She raised a feeding appendage to quiet them and then began her post-procedure lecture. What you witnessed today was the result of months of preparation, careful patient selection, and methodical execution. It was not magic. It was not a miracle. It was the application of techniques refined over millions of years of evolution, adapted through trial and error to work across species lines. Some of you will want to learn these techniques yourselves, but understand that bioelectric healing is only one approach among many. The ZHRN psychospiritual methods can accomplish things that Vexnari techniques cannot. Collective cellular regeneration has applications where bioelectric work is useless. Human surgical precision exceeds anything my species has developed. The goal of this institute is not to elevate one approach above others, but to teach you how to recognize which approach is most appropriate for each patient and how to combine multiple approaches when necessary. She paused, scanning the faces of her students. They were young, most of them, full of enthusiasm and idealism. That enthusiasm would be tested in the months and years ahead as they encountered patients who could not be helped, procedures that failed despite perfect technique, and the countless frustrations that came with pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge. But, for now, in this moment, they believed that anything was possible. That belief was precious, and Zyrith would do everything in her power to nurture it while also tempering it with the wisdom that came from experience. Elena Rodriguez's recovery is only beginning, Zyrith continued. Over the next weeks and months, she will need to work harder than she has ever worked in her life. There will be setbacks and frustrations. There will be days when she questions whether the procedure was worth the effort. Your role as future physicians will not be simply to perform technically impressive procedures, but to support patients through the entire healing journey. Remember that as you proceed through your training. The students nodded solemnly, some taking notes while others simply absorbed the message. Zyrith dismissed them shortly after, too exhausted to continue teaching. She made her way to her quarters, one of the Vexnari-optimized spaces in the facility's new wing, and collapsed onto her resting platform. Marcus found her there an hour later, sitting in dim red light, and staring at nothing in particular. He knocked softly on the doorframe to announce his presence, a gesture of courtesy she appreciated. "May I come in?" he asked. "You may," Zyrith replied, not moving from her position. Marcus entered and settled into one of the chairs that had been provided for human visitors. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, neither feeling the need to fill the space with unnecessary words. This was something Zyrith valued about Marcus, his understanding that sometimes silence was more meaningful than conversation. "You did something remarkable today," Marcus finally said. "Again, how many is that now?" 5. 6 successful procedures. 7, Zyrith corrected, though 2 were only partial successes. The patients improved, but not to the extent we had hoped. Still better outcomes than they would have received through conventional treatment, Marcus pointed out. "You are building an impressive track record, Zyrith. The Institute's reputation is spreading. We have been receiving inquiries from medical centers across a dozen worlds. Everyone wants to know if the miracles they are hearing about are real." "They are not miracles," Zyrith said firmly. "I wish people would stop using that word. Miracles imply divine intervention or inexplicable phenomena. What we are doing here is science, methodical and replicable, or at least potentially replicable once we figure out how to teach these techniques to others." "That is the challenge, is it not?" Marcus agreed. "How do you teach something that relies so heavily on feeding senses that other species do not possess?" The ZHRN have been struggling with similar questions about their psychospiritual healing. How do you convey intuitive knowledge that developed over millions of years of evolution to beings whose biology works completely differently? "I do not know," Zyrith admitted. "But we must find a way. Otherwise, this remains limited to a handful of practitioners, and the Institute's impact will be constrained." Kithara believed that healing knowledge should be widely shared, not hoarded by specialists. "We need to find methods that work even for species without specialized bioelectric senses." "We will figure it out," Marcus said with confidence. "Between your expertise, my experience as a patient, and the collective intelligence of everyone at the Institute, we will find approaches that work. It may take years, but we have time." Zyrith clicked her amusement at his optimism, but she found it infectious despite her fatigue. This was another thing she had learned from Marcus, that optimism was not the same as naivety. He had suffered enormously, had spent 2 decades dying slowly from injuries sustained while doing important work. Yet he had not become bitter or cynical. Instead, he had emerged from his suffering with a determination to ensure others did not have to endure the same fate. That determination was inspiring, even to someone from a completely different species with a completely different evolutionary history. "How is your recovery progressing?" Zyrith asked, changing the subject. "Are the prosthetics performing to specifications?" "Better than specifications," Marcus replied, extending his artificial leg. "The engineers keep improving the neural interface. I barely notice it is not my original limb anymore. And the pain the constant pain that defined my existence for 20 years, is almost entirely gone. I have occasional phantom sensations, but nothing compared to what I used to endure. Good, Xyrith said simply, but the word carried layers of meaning. Marcus understood what she was really saying, that his recovery validated her decision to stay on Earth, that his continued improvement justified the sacrifices she had made in leaving her clanship and taking on responsibilities she had never sought. He was the proof that this work mattered, that the vision Kithara had died for was worth pursuing. They talked for another hour, discussing the day's procedure, plans for upcoming training sessions, and the various administrative challenges that seemed to multiply faster than they could be addressed. Eventually, Marcus departed to let Xyrith rest, but before leaving, he paused in the doorway. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for teaching, for continuing Kithara's work. I know this is not the life you planned for yourself." "Plans change," Xyrith replied. "Sometimes for the better. I came to Earth seeking revenge, and found a calling instead. That is not a bad trait." "No," Marcus agreed with a smile. "Not bad at all." After he left, Xyrith allowed herself to fully relax for the first time since the procedure began. She thought about Elena, about the look of wonder on her face when she realized she could feel her legs again. She thought about the students who had watched the procedure, some of whom would go on to develop their own techniques and approaches, building on what she had taught them. She thought about Kithara, and how proud her nestmate would be to see what had been built in her name. The work was difficult. The challenges were constant. But, lying there in the dim red light of her quarters, exhausted but satisfied, Xyrith could honestly say she was happy. Happier than she had been during her 17 cycles of planning revenge. Happier than she had been when she first arrived on Earth with murder in her hearts. Sometimes the greatest vengeance was simply to live well, to take the pain inflicted on you, and transform it into something beautiful. Kithara had understood that. Now Xyrith was learning it too. 2 years after the founding of the Kithara Institute for Cross-Species Medical Studies, Xyrith stood before a gathering of over 300 beings from 17 different species and realized that what had started as a small experimental program had grown into something that might actually change the galaxy. The annual symposium had drawn physicians, researchers, politicians, and journalists from across known space, all eager to learn about the revolutionary approaches to medicine being developed at this remote facility on Earth. The symposium was being held in a massive new auditorium that had been constructed specifically to accommodate the diverse environmental needs of multiple species. Different sections of the seating area had customized atmospheric conditions, lighting, and gravity settings. It was an engineering marvel, but, more importantly, it was a statement of commitment to the Institute's foundational philosophy, that true collaboration required meeting beings where they were rather than expecting everyone to adapt to a single standard. Xyrith had been asked to deliver the keynote address, an honor that made her deeply uncomfortable but that she could not refuse. As the Institute's co-director and the physician who had pioneered the cross-species bioelectric healing techniques, she was the public face of the program, whether she liked it or not. Standing on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces and sensory organs and consciousness fields that represented the audience, she felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. "When I came to Earth 2 years ago," she began, her words being simultaneously translated into 15 languages and 3 nonverbal communication modes, "I came seeking vengeance. I believed that a human named Marcus Webb had murdered my nestmate, Kithara. I planned to drain him, to feel his life force flowing into me as payment for the life that had been taken. I was angry, grief-stricken, and absolutely certain of my righteousness." She paused, letting the confession settle. It was not the beginning most people expected for a keynote address at a medical symposium. "I was wrong about almost everything," she continued. "Marcus Webb was not a murderer, but a victim. Kithara had not been killed, but had sacrificed herself willingly to save him from a lethal infection. The cover-up I had detected was not malice, but misguided protection. And the vengeance I sought would have been nothing more than murder dressed in the language of justice." Xyrith activated the holographic display behind her, showing images of the Institute as it had looked 2 years ago, a small cluster of prefabricated buildings in the Alaskan wilderness. This place was born from my failure to understand the truth. From the moment when I chose not to kill Marcus Webb, but to try to save him instead. From the recognition that Kithra's legacy should be healing, not hatred. Everything we have accomplished here, every life we have saved, every technique we have developed, exists because I was wrong and had the grace to admit it. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. This was not the triumphant narrative they had expected, but it was clearly more compelling for its honesty. The work we do at the Kithra Institute is built on a simple but radical premise, that the biological differences between species are sources of strength rather than barriers to cooperation. Humans have developed extraordinary surgical techniques and pharmaceutical interventions. Vexnari understand bioelectric manipulation. The ZHRN have mastered psychospiritual healing. The collective can regenerate tissue at the cellular level. The KRYLL have pain management techniques that border on the miraculous. Each species has evolved unique approaches to healing, shaped by their specific biology and environmental challenges. She advanced the holographic display to show the current institute, now a sprawling campus with dozens of buildings, hundreds of staff members, and facilities that could accommodate treatments for nearly any known species. For most of galactic history, these approaches existed in isolation. A Vexnari patient would seek Vexnari medicine. A human patient would seek human medicine. Cross-species treatment was rare and usually limited to emergency situations where nothing else was available. But we are proving that isolation is a choice, not a necessity. That by combining our approaches, by learning from each other and adapting techniques across biological boundaries, we can achieve outcomes that would be impossible within any single medical tradition. Zyrith brought up case studies, anonymized but powerful. A collective crystalline being with fracture damage that traditional regeneration could not repair, healed through a combination of cellular regeneration and Vexnari bioelectric stabilization. A human child with a congenital neural disorder that human medicine could not address, treated successfully using ZHRN psychospiritual techniques adapted for a different neurology. A KRYLL warrior with severe pain sensitivity damage, restored through an unprecedented collaboration between KRYLL pain specialists and human pharmaceutical experts. In 2 years, we have treated over 400 patients using integrated cross-species approaches, Zyrith said. Our success rate is 83%. Significantly higher than any single species medical center for comparable conditions. We have trained 72 physicians from 11 different species in cross-species treatment protocols. We have published 49 peer-reviewed papers documenting our techniques and outcomes. And we have barely scratched the surface of what is possible. She paused again, this time to take a drink of the nutrient solution that helped her maintain her energy during long presentations. The audience waited patiently, understanding that this was a marathon address, not a sprint. But success brings new challenges, Zyrith continued. We have proven that cross-species medicine works. Now we must figure out how to scale it beyond this single facility. How do we train thousands of physicians instead of dozens? How do we build the infrastructure needed to support integrated medical centers on dozens of worlds? How do we overcome political resistance from those who see cross-species collaboration as a threat rather than an opportunity? These are the questions that will define the next phase of our work. She gestured to the audience. Many of you are here because you want to bring what we have learned back to your own worlds. Medical directors hoping to establish similar programs. Politicians seeking to understand whether public funding is justified. Researchers curious about our techniques. Journalists wanting to tell compelling stories. I welcome all of you. But I also want to be clear about what this work requires. The holographic display shifted to show images of institute staff during intense training sessions, of physicians struggling to understand concepts that were alien to their biological frameworks, of late-night collaboration sessions where exhausted beings from different species tried to find common ground. Cross-species medicine is hard, Zyrith said bluntly. It requires you to question everything you think you know about healing. It requires you to trust beings whose biology and thought processes are fundamentally different from your own. It requires patience when communication breaks down, humility when your techniques fail, and creativity when standard approaches do not work. It requires you to see past the surface differences between species and Recognize the universal truth that suffering is suffering, regardless of what form it takes. She looked directly at the audience, her four eyes scanning across the diverse assembly. Some of you will not be able to do this work. Your cultural conditioning may be too strong. Your belief in the superiority of your own species approaches too deeply ingrained. There is no shame in that. Single-species medicine is still valuable and necessary. Not every physician needs to be a cross-species specialist. But for those of you who can embrace this path, who can learn to see the universe through multiple sets of eyes simultaneously, who can hold space for uncertainty and ambiguity while still maintaining the decisive action that healing requires, the rewards are extraordinary. You will save lives that no one else can save. You will solve problems that have baffled specialists for generations. You will be part of something larger than yourself, a genuine revolution in how we understand health and healing across the galaxy. Xyrith signaled for the holographic display to show a final image, a memorial wall that had been installed at the Institute's entrance. Inscribed on it in 17 different writing systems was Kithara's name, along with a quote from her research notes. Healing knows no species. Suffering recognizes no borders. Our knowledge belongs to all beings, or it belongs to none. My nestmate died believing those words, Xyrith said, her voice thick with emotion that her translator rendered as universal tones of grief and pride. She gave her life to demonstrate that cross-species cooperation was not just possible, but essential. This institute exists to prove that her sacrifice was not in vain. Every patient we heal, every physician we train, every technique we develop is a testament to her vision of a galaxy where medical knowledge flows freely across species boundaries. She stepped back from the podium, signaling the end of her formal remarks. I will now take questions. Please be patient as translations are processed. The questions came rapidly, from beings of all species and backgrounds. Some wanted technical details about specific procedures. Others asked about funding models and administrative structures. Several inquired about how to overcome political resistance to cross-species programs on their homeworlds. Xyrith answered each question as thoroughly as time allowed, drawing on 2 years of experience managing the Institute's growth. One question, from a Zichrin physician whose name translated roughly as Harmonious Echo, stood out. You have spoken about the challenges and rewards of this work. But what about the personal cost? You left your clanship, your research career, everything familiar to take on this role. Do you ever regret that choice? Xyrith considered the question carefully. Regret is complex, she finally said. I regret that Kithara had to die for this work to begin. I regret the years I spent consumed by anger and plans for revenge. I regret moments of frustration when progress has been slower than I hoped, when patients I wanted to save died despite our best efforts, when political obstacles prevented us from helping beings who needed us. But do I regret staying on Earth, taking on this role, dedicating myself to cross-species medicine? No. This work has given me something I did not know I was missing. Purpose that extends beyond my own survival and satisfaction. When I was a xenobiologist aboard my clanship, I was good at my work. I made contributions to scientific knowledge. But I was not necessary. Someone else could have done the same research, asked the same questions, reached the same conclusions. Here, at this institute, doing this work, I am necessary. Not because I am uniquely talented, though I have skills that are rare. Not because I am irreplaceable, though training my successors will take time. But because I am living proof that beings can change, that the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are capable of can be rewritten. I came here as a hunter seeking prey and became a healer instead. If I can make that transformation, then perhaps any being can. That possibility, that hope, is worth every sacrifice I have made. The symposium continued for 3 more days, filled with presentations, demonstrations, networking sessions, and intensive discussions about the future of cross-species medicine. Xyrith participated in dozens of conversations, gave multiple interviews, and barely slept. By the final evening, she was exhausted but satisfied. The symposium had accomplished its goal of spreading awareness and building enthusiasm for the Institute's approach. Several worlds had committed to funding similar programs. Multiple universities had expressed interest in incorporating cross-species medical training into their curricula. The revolution Kithara had died for was genuinely beginning. On the symposium's final night, the Institute hosted a reception in Kithara's Memorial Garden, a contemplative space that combined elements from multiple species' healing traditions. Humans would have called it a mixture of park, meditation space, and art installation. Vexnari would have recognized it as a traditional twilight grove, adapted for a foreign world. The Zhrins saw it as a harmonic resonance chamber. Each species found meaning in the space according to their own perceptions. Xyrith stood at the center of the garden, beneath a sculpture that represented Kithara's bioelectric signature captured in crystal and light. It was beautiful in ways that transcended species-specific aesthetics, a truly universal artwork. Around her, symposium attendees mingled, the various species interacting with a comfort that would have been impossible just a few years ago. This was the Institute's other great accomplishment, normalizing cross-species interaction, making it routine rather than exceptional. Marcus Webb found her there, as she had known he would. He had attended all 4 days of the symposium despite his demanding schedule as the Institute's co-director and head of patient experience. His prosthetic leg and arm worked so well now that most people did not realize he was using artificial limbs unless he mentioned it. The chronic pain that had defined his existence for 2 decades was a distant memory. He was, by any measure, a living advertisement for everything the Institute had accomplished. "Quite a week," Marcus said, settling onto a bench beside where Xyrith stood. "I have had more meaningful conversations in the past 4 days than in the previous 2 years combined." "The symposium exceeded my expectations," Xyrith agreed. "Though I am relieved it is over. I am not comfortable being the center of attention." "You handled it well," Marcus assured her. "Your keynote address was perfect. Honest, compelling, visionary without being unrealistic. Several people told me it was the best medical keynote they had ever heard. And these were beings who have attended hundreds of conferences across dozens of worlds." "They were being polite," Xyrith said, though she felt pleased despite herself. "They were being honest," Marcus corrected. "You have a gift for this work, Xyrith. Not just the technical aspects of healing, but the bigger picture of what we are trying to build here. You see connections that others miss, understand implications that escape conventional thinking. That is why the Institute has been so successful. That is why Kithara chose you as her nestmate." Xyrith's skin cycled through complex colors expressing emotions she did not have words for in any language. "Kithara did not choose me for any special qualities. We emerged from our larval states together. The pairing was circumstantial. Perhaps," Marcus said, "or perhaps Kithara saw something in you that you did not see in yourself. A capacity for growth, for change, for becoming more than what your biology alone would predict. She left that bioelectric template in my body knowing that someday, someone might be able to read it and use it for healing. I have to believe she knew that if anyone could do it, it would be you." Before Xyrith could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Elena Rodriguez, walking confidently without any assistive devices. Her recovery had been the Institute's most public success story, extensively documented and shared across multiple media platforms. She had become something of a celebrity, though she handled the attention with the same grace she had brought to her physical therapy. "Doctors," Elena greeted them warmly. "I wanted to thank you both before I leave tomorrow. The past 2 years have been the most challenging of my life, but also the most rewarding. I went from believing I would never walk again to running marathons. That transformation would have been impossible without your skill and dedication. Your determination was the critical factor," Xyrith said. "We provided the tools, but you did the actual work of healing." "A generous interpretation," Elena said with a smile. "But I will accept it. I also wanted to let you know that I have been accepted into the Institute's training program. I am going to become a physician, specializing in rehabilitation medicine with a focus on spinal injuries. If I can help even one person experience what I experienced, it will be worth the years of study ahead." Xyrith felt her feeding appendages twitch with surprise and pleasure. "That is wonderful news. Your perspective as someone who has been through the process will be invaluable." "That is what Marcus said when I asked him for a recommendation," Elena replied. "He also said that the best physicians are often those who have experienced suffering personally. because they understand that healing is not just about fixing bodies, but about restoring hope. The three of them talked for a while longer, discussing Elena's plans and the trajectory of the Institute's training program. Eventually, Elena excused herself to continue her goodbyes, leaving Xyrith and Marcus alone in the garden again. "She is right, you know," Marcus said after a comfortable silence. "About suffering and forming healing. I spent 20 years in pain, watching my body fail, feeling helpless and trapped. That experience gave me insights that no amount of textbook study could provide. I understand what it feels like to be the patient, to be dependent on others, to hope desperately that someone, somewhere, might be able to help. That understanding makes me a better administrator and teacher." "The same is true for me," Xyrith admitted. "I spent 17 cycles consumed by grief and anger, convinced that violence was the only answer to my pain. That experience taught me how easy it is to see what we expect to see, to construct narratives that justify our worst impulses. Now when I work with patients or train students, I try to remain aware of my own biases and assumptions. I try to ask questions rather than jumping to conclusions. Kithara's death taught me that lesson, though I wish the cost had been lower." "She would be proud of you," Marcus said quietly, "of what you have built here, of the lives you have saved, of the physician and leader you have become. I wish she could see it." "Perhaps she can," Xyrith said, looking up at the crystal sculpture that held her nestmate's bioelectric signature. "Vexnari believe that when we die, our energy returns to the cosmos but maintains its pattern, joining the great network of all beings who came before. Kithara's energy is out there somewhere, watching and approving. Or at least, I find comfort in believing so." They remained in the garden as the reception wound down, as attendees departed for their various accommodations, as the Institute's grounds grew quiet under Earth's unfamiliar stars. Xyrith thought about everything that had changed in 2 years, about the hunter she had been and the healer she had become. The transformation still felt surreal at times, as if she might wake up and discover it was all a dream, that she was still aboard her clan ship plotting revenge rather than standing in a memorial garden on an alien world discussing the future of galactic medicine. But it was real. The Institute was real. The patients she had healed were real. The students she had trained were real. The future they were building together was real. And, more importantly, it was just beginning. 2 years was nothing in the lifespan of a true revolution. The work ahead would take decades, possibly centuries. But Xyrith had time. Vexnari lived long lives, and she intended to use every year of hers in service of the vision Kithara had died for. The next morning, as the symposium attendees departed for their respective worlds, Xyrith stood at the Institute's entrance and watched them go. Each departing ship carried with it seeds of change, beings who had been inspired or educated or transformed by what they had witnessed. Some would establish similar programs on their homeworlds. Others would incorporate cross-species approaches into existing medical centers. Still others would simply carry the message that cooperation was possible, that the barriers between species were not as insurmountable as tradition suggested. Marcus joined her at the entrance, and together they watched the last ships disappear into Earth's blue sky. "Ready to get back to work?" Marcus asked. "Always," Xyrith replied. "We have a new training cohort starting next week. 3 critical patients arriving from the Andromeda sector, and the funding proposal for the expansion project is due in 2 weeks. There is no shortage of work to be done." "Good," Marcus said with satisfaction. "I would hate to be bored." They turned away from the sky and walked back into the Institute, back to the endless tasks and challenges and opportunities that filled their days. As they passed Kithara's memorial, Xyrith paused briefly and touched the crystal sculpture, feeling the faint resonance of her nestmate's preserved energy signature. "Thank you," she whispered in her native language, "for showing me that vengeance is hollow but healing is infinite, for leaving me a path to follow even in death, for believing that I could be more than a hunter. I will honor your sacrifice every day for the rest of my life." The crystal seemed to pulse with light in response, though Xyrith knew it was probably just the morning sun catching its facets at a particular angle. But she chose to interpret it as acknowledgement, as approval, as Kithara's way of saying that she had done well and should continue the work. And she would. For however many years she had left, for however many patients needed healing, for however many students required teaching, Xyrith would dedicate herself to the vision of cross-species medicine that Kithara had died to protect. She had come to Earth seeking blood and found purpose instead. She had arrived as a hunter and become a healer. And in making that transformation, she had discovered the most profound truth of all, that what we are is far less important than what we choose to become. The galaxy was vast, containing trillions of beings from thousands of species, each with their own approaches to healing and their own understandings of medicine. But in this small corner of a minor world, in a facility named for a Vexnari scientist who had sacrificed herself for a human stranger, something new was being built. Something that transcended species boundaries and biological differences. Something that honored the simple, radical belief that all beings deserved healing, regardless of their origins. It was not vengeance that would change the galaxy. It was compassion. And Xyrith, who had traveled across the stars seeking the former, had been fortunate enough to discover the latter instead. That discovery had saved her life even more certainly than she had saved Marcus Webb's. And for that gift, that unexpected grace, she would be grateful every single day. The hunter had become the healer. The story that had begun with hate had ended with hope. And in the space between those 2 points, in the journey from vengeance to redemption, Xyrith had discovered that the universe was kinder and stranger and more full of possibility than she had ever imagined. She walked back into the institute with Marcus beside her, ready to face whatever challenges the day would bring, confident that the work they were doing mattered and would continue to matter long after both of them were gone. Kithara's legacy was safe. The future was bright. And the alien vampire who had arrived seeking vengeance had found something infinitely more valuable instead, a reason to live, to grow, and to give back to a universe that had given her far more than she had ever expected to receive. The end.